Welcome back to the show, everybody. Thanks so much again for tuning in. So I'm going to do a podcast today, a solo podcast, and what I'm going to be chatting about is how to improve your overall circadian rhythm so you can sleep better at night. So a lot of people are struggling with sleep, and we know that sleep is a cornerstone of health, maybe even more important than diet and exercise. And so what I'm going to do today is go over some evidence-based strategies on how you can sleep better at night and also just get a better circadian rhythm going overall. And so before I get into the details, I just want to go over a couple things about why I'm doing this particular podcast. So as I said, sleep is a cornerstone of health, but in particular, the circadian rhythm and sleep, what it controls is your overall sleep-wake cycle, your hormone release, which is related to melatonin and cortisol, your metabolism, your immune function, and overall your general well-being. These are all related to your circadian rhythm. And so very important that we understand and know how to improve this so that we can feel better overall and just live a healthier life. Any disruption in circadian rhythm has been linked to obesity, obviously insomnia, depression, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. So all these things, which we don't want to have, are linked to a poor circadian rhythm. And so again, the goal of this podcast is to really just provide you with some really evidence-based strategies backed by randomized controlled trials and meta-analysis when they are available so that you can improve your circadian rhythm and sleep better at night. All right, so I'm just going to get into the strategies. So number one, and you've probably heard of this one before, and the reason you've heard of it is because it's the number one reason why many people do not sleep well at night, and why sometimes they actually don't get very much REM sleep, and also why they don't have very much energy in the day. And this is going to be related to getting some good morning sunlight. So your eyes have these melanopsin ganglion retinal cells, and these cells in your eyes are extremely important. And the reason why they're important is because they are there so that you can get some sunlight in the morning within about 5 to 30 minutes or 5 minutes to, an hour or so of awakening. So try to get it as soon as you can. And what you want to do is you want to get sunlight in your eyes, and this is going to really help regulate your overall circadian rhythm. And so when you get the sunlight in your eyes, you are going to be getting those cells going that I just mentioned. So those, again, I know it's a very tedious word, but those melanopsin ganglion retinal cells, once you get sunlight in those eyes, that's going to be really the master, as we call it, zookeeper, or one of the things that's really going to promote a really well-balanced circadian rhythm. And so if you are not getting sunlight in the morning, this is something that you can certainly do that will dramatically make a shift in your circadian rhythm overall. Now, I know that there's people out there who are saying, okay, it's easy for you to say because, right now you're waking up in the summertime, in Ontario at, around 7 a.m. or 6:30 a.m. is when I usually get up, and the sunlight is usually out at that time. But what you do when the sun is not out at that time? So first of all, if it is cloudy, you actually still can get some sunlight, or you still can get those blue light and the UVA rays, which seem to be, the biggest parts of promoting the circadian rhythm into your eyes. It's just that you're going to need to spend more time outside. So instead of, say, spending, 5 to 15 minutes outside within, 0 minutes to an hour of awakening, what you really want to do is, say, spend, 15 to maybe even 30 minutes, which sometimes is a little bit more impractical for people. There's a couple solutions to this, though. So one is you can get something called Luminette 3 glasses. So these are glasses that you can actually just wear, and then they're very portable. You can brush your teeth, you can drink coffee, you can do it. You can make your coffee. You can basically do whatever while you have these glasses on. I do have a pair of them. I'm not paid to say this, and they don't really disrupt my morning functioning at all. So they have those 3 different settings on them: 500, 1,000 lux, and 1,500 lux, that you can wear these glasses for 20, 40, or 60 minutes. I don't have any issues with going at the 1,500 lux, so I just wear them for 20 minutes in the morning sometimes when I can't get that morning sunlight. Other people will just kind of stare at a light box at about 10,000 lux. That's kind of been the gold standard in most studies that have shown that it can really help with circadian rhythm overall. And so those are a couple strategies that you can utilize to help with your circadian rhythm if you're not able to get sunlight in the morning. And so, the bright light therapy can really dramatically shift your overall circadian rhythm. They've done meta-analysis studies in sleep workers that have shown that it can improve your circadian rhythm or shift it by about 32 minutes or so. And it can also improve your sleep efficiency. So, a very powerful tool that you can easily utilize. And the other part about getting sunlight in the morning as well, that's really good, is that it's going to suppress melatonin. So we all know that melatonin is good for sleep, but obviously in the morning when you're getting up and getting going, you don't want that overnight melatonin lingering in your body. And so by getting that sunlight, you're basically eliminating that melatonin, and then you're boosting cortisol. And when people think of cortisol or hear the word cortisol, they often think, this is bad, but cortisol is there for a reason, and you want your cortisol to be operating basically like a staircase so that it's high in the morning and then goes down throughout the day and is lower at night. And when your cortisol is lower at night, it's easier to sleep, but you do need cortisol throughout the day for energy. And so by having that sunlight in your eyes in the morning, you're going to be boosting your cortisol, which can certainly help with your circadian rhythm. So then it comes to the question, well, what do I do at night? So obviously at night, what you want to do is you want to avoid any blue light. And so this is why a lot of people, such as myself, wear blue light blocking glasses at night. And I try to get them on at least an hour, but sometimes even 2 hours before bed. And the reason is because if you have any kind of blue light, like it's even been shown that like 10 lux, which is almost like nothing, your phone, I think is like 100 or something like that. So 10 lux of light is almost like nothing. That can actually disrupt melatonin release by about 80%. So anything that you can do to reduce your exposure to blue light before you go to bed, again, try to reduce your exposure within about 2 hours. Is going to be super helpful for regulating your circadian rhythm. And so blue light glasses is one strategy. One thing I do too that I have in my home is we have some red lights. So it's not like traditional red light therapy. These are just like actual red light bulbs that I've put in my bedroom and also in the kitchen, which is basically the only two areas where I may be within a couple hours of bedtime. Obviously, dimming the lights is something you can do as well, but sometimes you do just need a little bit of light to live and get done whatever you need to get done within an hour or two before you go to bed. And so by having the red lights, again, not red light therapy, just red light, so it's not emitting any blue light, then you are going to be supporting your overall circadian rhythm. So just a couple, things that I've done that have helped me, support my circadian rhythm, for getting good darkness at night, and not necessarily even, overall darkness, but at least just not getting any blue light. So let's move on to another strategy. I think we've talked about light pretty extensively. And again, that one definitely is the most important one. But one thing you can do in the morning as well is just move. Okay. So it doesn't necessarily have to be like exercise. If you can do your workout in the morning, fantastic. Sometimes I'm able to do that. Sometimes, unfortunately, I'm not able to do that. Just because, I get up at 6:30, I work at 9, and I have a little bit of a commute to work, and I, need to do everything that I need to get done before I get to work. And many people are in that similar situation, maybe have kids at home, whatever it is, it's just kind of delaying you from, or, keeping you from being able to do your morning workout. And so one thing you can do though is just walk just for like 5 minutes. Just walking even for 5 minutes can really support your circadian rhythm. If you want to kind of stack things, what you can do is you can walk outside. And so that way you're getting the sunlight and you're also getting the movement or the walking. And again, the walking is really going to support your circadian rhythm. So getting just a little bit of movement, like 5 to 10 minutes of brisk walking in the morning, makes a gigantic difference. Now let's talk a little bit about exercise because I just mentioned that I always don't always exercise early in the morning. Sometimes I'm able to get it in on certain days if my schedule allows it, and when I can, I usually do that. But there's other days where it doesn't allow it, and so what you want to do is you want to finish your workouts about 3 to 4 hours if you can before you go to bed. All right. And during those workouts, the ones where you're going to be doing it in 3 to 4 hours before bed, try not to do anything too like high intensity. Like weight training is fine. Doing like zone 2 cardio is fine, but really like the high intensity interval training, things that really are going to rev up your nervous system. Those things are things that you want to avoid on those days and try to do those on the days where you can work out in the morning. So that's what I try to do, in the evening when I have to work out, when I'm not able to work out in the day, that's when I'll do my weights. And again, even like a big, sometimes leg workout can be a little bit disruptive. So, try to get the weight workouts that you find are, not as taxing overall on your body. Or do something like zone 2 cardio. Zone 2 cardio is when you have your heart rate at about 60 to 70%. So you're not going too hard. And it obviously has a tremendous amount of benefits. I've, done podcasts on zone 2 cardio before. It's dramatically improves your endurance. It can be excellent for your glucose metabolism. There's so many different benefits on this. And I actually picked up that within maybe about 2 years or so from Dr. Peter Attia, who's a big zone 2 cardio fan. And I won't go any further too much on that, but try to do about 2 hours if you can of zone 2 cardio a week. That'd be a very solid level. What else can you do in the morning to help with your circadian rhythm? So not necessarily something that has been shown to help with circadian rhythm specifically, but can just help with your morning routine and kind of getting you going, is taking a cold shower. So again, I don't have any studies that kind of back up, cold showers in the morning will advance or improve your circadian rhythm. But they can increase your overall alertness through noradrenaline and cortisol. So as I mentioned earlier, the sunlight in the morning actually increases your cortisol, which is what we want in the morning. And something that cold showers can do is they can also increase your cortisol in the morning. And so, certainly we do need more evidence on cold showers and how they do affect your circadian rhythm. But there does seem to be some, fairly plausible mechanisms there that it can certainly be at least supportive. And Dr. Andrew Huberman has talked about this and how it can potentially increase dopamine for 2 to 6 hours. So increase your overall motivation and well-being for 2 to 6 hours. So something that some people, really swear by, but again, we do need more evidence on that overall, more randomized control trials. What else can you do in the morning? So social interaction. So social interaction is known as kind of a secondary Zeitgeber. So again, Zeitgebers are things that we refer to that are helpful for your overall circadian rhythm or that affect your circadian rhythm. And so just by having a small conversation with someone at breakfast, maybe have a phone call on the way to work, just engaging in some kind of social interaction can actually help improve your overall circadian rhythm. And so I know there's some people who, have jobs where they're living alone, where, they're not really interacting too much at home and then again in the morning. And so, make sure that you do get some social interaction in the morning, which can help overall improve your circadian rhythm. So let's talk about meal timing because this comes up quite a bit too. And meals are strongly linked to your peripheral clock cues and your overall rhythm. So what you want to avoid really is eating big meals before bed. So try to have, your last big meal within 3 to 4 hours before bed. I would really try to not have anything at least 2 hours before bed. So, if you need something, within that, say 2 to 3 hour window before bed, having like a small light snack, that can be okay. Maybe it's a protein shake, or then obviously, you're getting potentially into too many liquids, but, having some berries, frozen berries is something that I kind of enjoy at night. Something like that can be okay, but you don't want to have any, large meals within 2 to 3 hours before bed. And so try to cut it off at 2 hours at least. And then your large meals, within 3 to 4 hours. Um, and, this can really disrupt your overall health if you do engage in eating before bed. So, eating within 2 hours of bedtime, it was a randomized controlled trial that showed that it worsened sleep efficiency. So, how efficient you are when you sleep. So, sleep efficiency is like, if you sleep for 7 hours out of the 7 that you're in bed, you have a wonderful sleep efficiency. If you're sleeping only for 4 or 5 hours of 7 hours in bed, obviously, it's a poor sleep efficiency. And so that's what meal timing can really mess up. And it can also dysregulate your glucose metabolism. So it can elevate your blood sugar levels. Again, things that you really want to, avoid and will, ultimately worsen your overall health. Other studies, there was a meta-analysis that showed that late night eating or eating past 9 p.m. can increase your risk of obesity. So, trying not to eat before bed is something that some people have found to be, tremendously helpful. I mentioned earlier about the sleep efficiency, but, others have noted that it can help with their overall sleep latency. So how fast they fall asleep and just their overall quality of sleep overall. One thing, unfortunately, and, I am someone who does like spicy foods, but, having spicy foods before bed, that is like one of the worst things you can do that really disrupts your sleep. So, if you are going to, snack again, like late before bed, really try to avoid anything spicy because that is definitely going to disrupt your sleep. What about people who do some, time restricted eating or some intermittent fasting? What you want to do then is try to, cut your meal off as early as you can before bed. And then when you get up in the morning, actually having a little bit of food actually helps with your circadian rhythm. So I know that some people swear by intermittent fasting, and I think it's fantastic for the people who swear by. And I've seen so many people that have used this technique and have had excellent results with it. So I certainly don't want to, disrupt that. But, you can, in fact, cut your last meal off, even if it's like at 6 p.m., which I know is sometimes early for people. And then when you get up, you can have something around 8 a.m. and that can help with your overall circadian rhythm. So I know that some people like to, delay their meal for even later in the day, 12 o'clock or even 2 o'clock for some people. Some people it's even later. They don't really eat till the evening. Not really a good idea for your overall circadian rhythm. But again, this is just, one thing out of the things that I'm mentioning. So if you are someone who can get away with this, fantastic. But if you are struggling with sleep and you do intermittent fasting and you're not eating anything in the morning, something to reconsider. You may have some beneficial and positive effects by, eating a little bit early in the morning. Even if it's just, a shake, something where you're just getting, some nutrients in. A big question that people have when it comes to circadian rhythm is melatonin. Overall, I'm not a fan of melatonin, as an overall sleep aid. And to be honest, most of the studies really show that it doesn't really even work that well. And I'm really not a fan of, kids using it because it can actually be really harmful for children, particularly to their hormones. And so, I'm not a big fan of using melatonin. That being said, if you are an adult and you're a shift worker or you are flying somewhere and there's going to be a significant, change in time, having melatonin can be helpful during that time just for the first night, and most melatonin supplements are way, way, way overdosed. Many, are using like 3, 5, 10 milligrams. Zero point 0.5 milligrams to 1 milligram is completely sufficient. Don't use any more than that. And, if you use that, say, on a day where you're a shift worker and you're kind of switching schedules, or if you are flying somewhere else and you want to avoid that jet lag, then using a little bit of melatonin before you go to sleep within say 2 to 3 hours before you go to sleep can be helpful for making that shift. But again, I don't advise using it as a sleep aid, just as like a one-time kind of punch when you are adjusting sleep schedules overall. So, what are some things that can disrupt your sleep at night? So, let's talk about the most obvious and the most consumed drug in the world, and that would be caffeine. So, caffeine, if you ingest caffeine within 6 hours before bed, it can actually reduce your sleep by 1 hour overall. That was a randomized control study done in 2013. So, that's pretty significant. And 6 hours is not, terribly close to bed. And 1 hour is a pretty significant amount of time to be sacrificing sleep. And it can delay your melatonin, by at least 40 minutes or so. Again, this was shown in that particular study. So, for many people, they take a hard cutoff around 2 p.m. For myself, I'm usually more about like 3 p.m. I usually go to bed around 10:30, sometimes 11. That's usually when I go to bed and fall asleep. Um, but the thing with caffeine too is that we all do metabolize it differently. And so, for myself, I've had genetic testing done where I'm not just a fast metabolizer, I'm an ultra fast metabolizer of caffeine. And so, if you are a fast metabolizer and ultra fast, you may be able to get away with using caffeine a little bit later in the day. But the general cutoff for a lot of people is around 8 hours before they go to bed. So again, I try to cut mine off at 3 p.m., even though I go to bed around 10:30 or 11. So, the 8 hours. But, that being said, like I'm an ultra fast metabolizer. So, I could potentially use it a little bit later. So sometimes, on the weekends, if I may extend, my sleep to say 11:30-ish. I usually don't like to go too much beyond that. I may have some caffeine a little bit later and it doesn't really affect me too much. And I'll usually just have, half caffeinated. That's what I have at home. I take a bag of caffeinated beans and a bag of decaf and I mix them together. That's what I have in my coffee maker. And so, it's not really a full dose of caffeine. I'm only really getting about 40 milligrams or so in a espresso shot. So sometimes people don't realize actually that drip coffee does usually have more caffeine than espresso coffee, even though we think of espresso as stronger. And obviously, it is stronger when you're looking at it, comparing it like liquid per liquid. But when you're looking at cup per cup, one shot of espresso versus regular coffee or drip coffee, there's actually generally more caffeine in regular coffee. But if you are interested and you want to, fine tune that a little bit further, genetic testing is something that you could get done. But again, the general cutoff rule is about 8 hours before bedtime. And in terms of, dose, some people will use 200, 300 milligrams. I'm probably right around 240-ish milligrams a day, something like that. I have about 6 cups of these, half caffeinated espressos throughout the day. So I'm around 240 milligrams. So I do keep, under that 300 milligrams. Some people, like I've heard Andrew Huberman say, I think he uses something like 600, maybe plus even a day, and he's okay with it. But he does use it through yerba mate, which is, a different source than having it through coffee. You'd have to ask him a little bit more, why he finds yerba mate to be less, say, stimulating overall or less disruptive. But, depending upon the source that you get your caffeine from, it may affect you a little bit differently. But most people, as we know, get their caffeine from coffee, some people tea, but, for a lot of people, it's coffee. What else can disrupt sleep? So, we talked about caffeine. What's the other big drug? Alcohol. So alcohol, some people will say, I sleep better on alcohol, but it really just helps with like sleep latency. So for many people, they do fall asleep faster with it, but then they wake up more and they have more of a fragmented sleep and it really disrupts their REM sleep. So the REM sleep, I've mentioned this before on the podcast, is incredibly important for your mind and your brain. It's basically like overnight therapy. Okay, so REM sleep is incredibly important. It's really good for your overall memory, like I said, but also to just your mood and your overall emotional regulation. So getting good REM sleep is critically important, and you don't want to do anything to disrupt it. Having alcohol, especially if you're having like more than, 2 drinks within about 3 hours of bedtime, that's really going to cause fragmented sleep. And that's been shown in multiple randomized controlled trials. One kind of little cheat, and I will say, I am, guilty of, still drinking alcohol just on the weekends, so only never during the week. One thing that I will do if I need sort of like a head change, I guess you could say, is that you could have like, what I would, and I kind of got this from Rob Wolf in 2011 when he wrote Paleo Solution, is he'll have 2 doubles. And again, I'm not advocating this, but 2 doubles around say like 7:30, goes to bed maybe around 11. I don't know if he specified that exactly in the book, but basically just 2 doubles, like kind of quickly. So within, say, like an hour. And that way you'll kind of get your head change, as he likes to call it. But you also won't be disrupting your overall sleep, or less likely to disrupt your overall sleep, because you have consumed that alcohol not within the 3 hour period of going to bed. So if you are going to, consume alcohol, try to do it, early evening and not so much close to bed. The closer to the bed that you drink the alcohol, the more likely it is to disrupt your overall sleep. So again, if you can, avoid it altogether. But if you are going to have any alcohol, try to have it with, at least within, or at least not within 3 hours, but preferably even 4 hours before you go to sleep. And that will less likely disrupt your overall sleep. What else can disrupt your sleep? Obviously, many people struggle with this, but this is, nocturia, or peeing a lot at night. Many people do this for many reasons. Sometimes it's a large prostate and overactive bladder. There are other medical conditions outside of just drinking too much water, but you do want to limit your fluid consumption, after supper time. So within 3 hours or so before bed, try to limit how much liquids you are consuming. Obviously, the more you consume closer to bed, the more likely you are to wake up at night. And when you have fragmented sleep, you're just not going to get that quality sleep anymore. It may jolt you out of REM sleep, jolt you out of deep sleep. And unfortunately, that's going to lead to a poor overall night's sleep and a poor overall well-being in the next morning. So try to limit your fluids at night. Couple things you can do if you're finding that your mouth is dry, or that you kind of just need some fluids before you go to bed. So there's a couple things that I do. One thing is I'll just have some ice cubes around, especially within like, 1 to 2 hours before bed. I find that just really kind of quenches my thirst if I really need something. And obviously I'm still getting some water within the ice cube, but it's going to be a lot less than say if I was, drinking drinking water before bed. And then the other thing too is xylitol. So you can get xylitol sprays. So I actually keep one by my bed, and that's what I use at night if I wake up. I may have a little bit of a sip of water, but then I'll use that xylitol spray in my mouth, and that kind of makes me feel like my mouth isn't dry anymore. And so really effective. And some people will also use the xylitol melts. They can put it in their cheeks, say, an hour or two before bed, or even right before bed if they feel like they're, really thirsty. And that can be helpful for reducing your overall fluid intake before bed. And like I said, that is a big thing that really disrupts, people's sleep. And, there certainly are some, medical reasons, particularly like enlarged prostate, for men, or an overactive bladder, can affect men and women. But increased fluid intake is something that's, universally will affect anyone, even if you do not have a medical problem. So just something to consider, and a couple little strategies that I've used that I found to be helpful. Again, the xylitol, and then also just using some ice cubes instead of actually drinking water. What about your overall environment, where you sleep? So let's talk about temperature control. So your core body temperature is going to naturally dip at night. And so, supporting this in some way is going to help your overall sleep. And so there was a meta-analysis done in 2019 that showed that taking a warm bath or shower within 1 to 2 hours of bedtime, it can actually decrease your sleep onset by about 10 minutes. So that's your sleep latency, or how fast it takes you to fall asleep. Some people like to use the sauna. I actually like to use the sauna not right before bed, because sometimes it can actually, increase your cortisol. Some people, though, do find it to be really helpful. And so what happens is that your body does need to dip in temperature at night. And so when you heat your body up close to bedtime, your body is forced to cool it down. So it's already dropping in temperature. And so that's why it's helpful for a lot of people. It kind of sounds a little bit counterintuitive, though, in some ways. Um, and then the opposite is true as well. So, having like a cold shower, something like that before bed is, be very disruptive for people. And then, like I said, too, the cold shower can increase your overall cortisol level, your noradrenaline, things that you don't want high before bed. You want your cortisol to be low before bed. And so keeping a very cool room is really helpful for a lot of people. I actually was just somewhere last night where the AC wasn't working in the hotel we stayed at. And, fortunately, I ended up with a pretty decent sleep overall, but it would definitely disrupted my sleep early on. And then luckily, when I fell asleep, I just kind of stayed asleep, but definitely disrupted the, early part of my sleep. And so, having, a really cool room is going to be super important. And for some people, that can be as cool as like 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And then for most people, though, it's going to be, 68 degrees Fahrenheit or a little bit less, but between 60 and 68 is often very helpful for many people for falling asleep. And for Celsius, that's about 16 to 20 degrees. So it is fairly, cool, but it's helpful overall for many people for getting a deeper sleep. What about noise? What about the environment? So obviously, noise can disrupt people, but there's so many, gadgets out there now that are really helpful for dispersing white noise or brown noise or whatever kind of noise that you kind of feel is very soothing. Some people just use a fan. These things can be really helpful for a lot of people. I've had a lot of patients and friends, who have anecdotally told me that it's kind of been a complete game changer for them. So, if that's something that you haven't optimized in terms of your sleep environment, I would really consider, getting some kind of device that can emit white noise, brown noise. You can use your phone if you want. Some people obviously are against having their phone in the room. Some people, they don't, mind having it. It doesn't disrupt their sleep. But just some way that you can, get some white noise can actually help stabilize your environment and lead to better overall sleep continuity throughout the night. So before sleep, within about 2 hours or so before sleep, you don't want to be doing anything that's going to be really disruptive. It's really going to be activating your mind. Okay, so doing, work that's really, really tedious, doing anything that's really going to use, your prefrontal cortex that involves a lot of like planning and thinking and these kinds of things, that can really be disruptful for sleep, and it can lead to rumination throughout the night. And so what you want to do is you want to do things that you find are really relaxing. This could be meditation. It could be journaling. For some people, watching a TV show is actually not too bad of an idea, as long as that TV show isn't something that's going to be disruptive. Like if it's some, deep, dark documentary that, is going to be giving you nightmares, obviously don't do it. It's kind of like a lighthearted comedy, it's not going to be keeping you up. That just kind of helps you relax. I think that's completely fine. Again, as long as you're wearing the blue blocking glasses, because again, we want to avoid any blue light in our eyes at night. So doing something like that, can definitely be helpful. Sometimes I do heart rate variability training before I go to bed. Many times I'll do it other times of the day, but that is something that can just be helpful for just calming down your overall nervous system and getting into that parasympathetic state. And another thing that, a lot of people do, without even necessarily trying to do it as something that helps with sleep, is just forgiveness. A lot of people do this through prayer, but forgiveness has actually been shown to be really helpful for people in terms of letting anger out before they go to sleep. and it decreases overall rumination, and it helps with overall sleep quality. So there's actually been studies on this that have shown that it can be extremely helpful. So if you are someone who's, you still have a lot on your mind at night, and you still have someone to forgive, it doesn't necessarily have to be like prayer in like a religious way or anything like that, but just try to forgive anyone before you go to bed. And again, I promise you, it will help you sleep better at night. So those are most of the things that I have for you regarding sleeping at night. If there's anything else that you guys have learned or that you think that I've missed, please leave them in the comments, because again, there's so many people who are struggling with sleep out there, and there's so many people who are just kind of struggling with their circadian rhythm, and they're not really even aware of, how to improve the circadian rhythm. Then, please leave those in the comments. Please message me. I'd definitely like to include them. And as always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back with another episode soon.